Welcome to B-Flow Sessions, the podcast where we help you find and stay in the flow on the water and in life. I'm your host, Brad Burton. Join me as I sit down with paddlers, athletes, and adventurers who are all seeking the flow. B-Flow Sessions is brought to you by our friends at Pucon Kayak Retreat. Are you dreaming of a Chilean whitewater escape this winter? Picture turquoise rapids, warm sunny days, and world-class rivers for every skill level, all based out of a riverside retreat built by paddlers for paddlers. If that sounds like your kind of winter, then Pucon Kayak Retreat is the place. To learn more or to book your dream kayak trip, reach out to me directly at bflowkayak@gmail.com and I'll help you get connected. Also, thanks to our partners who keep us in the flow, Dagger Kayaks, Stohlquist Waterwear, Sawyer Paddles, and Level 6 Gear. B-Flow Sessions is powered by Dagger Kayaks. Wherever there's water, Dagger Kayaks will help you find your flow. Team-tested, paddler-proven designs for all paddlers and all water. And thanks to our partners at Sawyer Paddles, Stohlquist PFDs, and Level 6 Gear for keeping us in the flow.
Welcome to the next episode of B-Flow Sessions. And in this episode, we are so pleased to be joined by one of the most influential instructors, one of the most influential people in paddling. I don't know if there's any stat that records this, but I bet she's taught more people to kayak and to roll maybe than any other person on the planet. Juliet Kastorff, welcome to B-Flow Sessions.
Thanks, Brad. It's really great to be here.
It's, and I apologize. We've had a hard time nailing down a time to talk, but I'm so glad that we finally get to connect here. And we actually had the opportunity to be on the water not that long ago together, and that was quite a treat for me.
I know, wasn't that fun?
Yeah, anytime you can get together with old friends on a great river, it's always a good time.
Yep. That was really cool.
Juliet and her husband Ken, they're proprietors of Endless River Adventures, one of the top kayak schools in the world, and it's based right there on the Nantahala River in the Nantahala Gorge. And Juliet's going to take us through her whole career in paddling, and like I said, one of the preeminent kayak instructors, and an amazing kayaker in her own right. But she really has focused on the instruction part, and like I said, she has probably brought more people into paddling, and now helps launch a non-for-profit bringing kids in Swain County into kayaking that we want to hear about it as well. But Juliet, tell us, how did you find your flow in kayaking? How did it all start?
Well, Brad, I was actually working up in Washington, D.C., and I was out at Great Falls hanging out with a friend that was a climber, and I hated climbing, but I was looking down at the river and watching all these little, crayons, paddling around and thinking, God, it looks like they're having so much more fun than I am. And so I was in the corporate world there, and I decided to go rafting on the Gully, but I needed people to go with, so I gathered up my friends, and I'm like, I'll do everything. I'll plan it, I'll get the trip, I'll get us tents if you'll just come with me. And so down the Gully we go, and of course, like many people who get started in kayaking, I was on a raft looking at those kayakers, and I turned to the guide and I'm like, okay, I want to do that. And he was like, great, go and learn. The West Virginia guides weren't the kind, they weren't very huggy-feely. They wouldn't be like, oh, right, cool, I'll help you out, I'll loan you a boat. They're like, just go and learn.
Right.
And so I went to REI and bought the only kayak that they had there, which was some old Perception Mirage or something. It was the only kayak.
Okay.
And, went and wobbled my way around the Potomac, and my friends would come with me. They had no interest in kayaking, but they'd play hacky sack while I wobbled around. And eventually I found out that there was this place down in North Carolina where you could actually really learn. I hate to say this, but this is long before the internet. This is in the late 80s.
Okay.
And so I loaded up my 2 golden retrievers in my Toyota Corolla and drove down to the Nantahala Outdoor Center. And it was the year of the raft rally. So I think it was 1990.
Okay, yeah, that sounds about right.
Flooded. And so we were there, 10-hour drive, take off work, load dogs. And so we went to the lake and learned how to ask for bow rescues. And then the instructors were like, sorry, we have to cancel. Everything's flooded. And I'll never forget, as I was getting back in my car to drive back to Washington, D.C., there were all these cars with boats pulling it around the Nantahala Outdoor Center. And I was like, obviously for people who are real kayakers, there's something cool going on. And, once I learned how to kayak, I knew that everybody was getting together to talk about where to go and paddle because it was raining. And so back up to DC I went, and that must have been late summer, the fall. And so I wobbled my way around all winter. And then in the spring I went out to Confluence over in Pennsylvania. Kara Ruppel's family owned it. And on the way there, it was snowing. And I'm like, what am I doing? And I show up, and Kara's dad was teaching, and he hadn't been out yet because it was Easter weekend, and he was really excited. So off we go kayaking, and all I had was a wool sweater. I mean, and my Perception kayak. And the only thing I knew how to do was wait for a bow rescue, and I had been a swimmer, so I could hold my breath. So at one point I tip over, and so there I am underneath, waiting for a bow rescue, and it doesn't happen. So finally I get out of the boat, and he's sitting there, and he starts yelling at me what were you doing? What were you taking so long getting out of your boat? And I was like, I thought I was supposed to ask for a bow rescue. And so that was day one. And then on day two, Kara and her sister, who at the time was probably 12 or something, took me on the lower yacht. And I swam from the top to the bottom, and I would get back in my boat, and Kara would be like, dang, you're a good sport about all this. Do you have a choice? Is there somewhere I could walk off? But it was the first thing I ever did that I'm I want to get good at this. I really loved it. And so I was at a crossroads professionally, and so I felt, I was in a master's program, and I was like, I could switch master's programs and leave the DC world, and I could become an English teacher, and I could move to North Carolina and finish my master's program and go kayaking all the time. To the Nantahala Gorge, knowing nobody. In fact, I left DC so fast that a year later, my friends there were like, where did you go? I was so scared that I knew I had to do it really quickly before I changed my mind, or before my parents really figured out what I was doing. And so I got here early, and I had a bicycle because I was used to riding a bike in DC, and so I was a big bikes belong on the streets advocate until I rode up the gorge about 3 times, and I shouldn't ride a bike in the Nantahala Gorge. But no. I would ride I would set a shuttle, and I would put in, paddle down, go back up, and I was waiting for his school to start, so I was just waitressing at Relia's restaurant.
Okay.
And that's where I met Kent. And it was really funny because, this is 1991, and so it's when NOC ran all these big clinics. And so, they'd run 7, 8, 9 clinics at a time, 10, 12 people, and they'd all come in for dinner. And so here came this clinic, and it was all guys, and they were hungry. And we had run out of whatever we were serving, and all we had left was vegetarian lasagna, which was really good.
Remember that vegetarian lasagna? It's pretty good.
Yeah, unless you're putting it down in front of a bunch of carnivores. And this kayak instructor was like, what is this? I thought we were having pork chops. And I'm like, no, you're lucky you get vegetarian lasagna. And the whole table, And so what was funny is, I was in that place in kayaking where I didn't know shit about kayaking, and I could barely make it down the Nantahala. But when Ken said, well, you could come with me and learn how to kayak, I was like, I don't need you to teach me how to kayak.
Wait a minute. I want to interlude here. You mean a hotshot instructor invited the cute blonde to go kayaking? That's quite original in the Nantahala
I
Gorge.
know,
That never
surprise,
happens.
surprise. Exactly, exactly. So, like, the first clinic that I tagged along on was Section 3 of the Chattooga. And, I know I'm, like, tagging along. So I'm, like, way in the back of this group. And they get down to Bull Sluice. I'm way in the back. And next thing you know, they're all, like, in the eddy getting ready to run Bull Sluice. And I, like, come bobbling down and barely make the eddy. And then they all, like, go running Bull Sluice, and I'm sitting there by myself going, oh my God, where did they go? And it just kind of continued like that all summer, and I got on the Ocoee, and then that fall, I was headed up to the Golly, and I remember coming, because the one thing that over the summer that I got was the most bomb-proof roll in the world. Both sides, obviously. I mean, look, I was around Ken. You better know how to roll if you're around Ken, since he's the one who came up with the C2C roll. But I'm coming out of the bathroom at the Golly, and a girl from down here, like, is walking in, and she's like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, running the Golly. And she's like, you have no business being here. And I'm like, oh, no. And then school started. And Ken was going off to Chile, and he's like, you should come down. And I'm like, oh, I can't. I'm a graduate student. I have to, I'm going to be teaching next semester. I have too many responsibilities. I ended up having kind of a falling out. I was at Western, and, in 1991, the graduate school at Western was not the same as it probably is today. And so I went home one day and I was like, screw that. And I'm like, I'm calling the travel agent. I'm going to Chile. And Ken and Spee were working together. And to be honest, Brad, here I just, was hanging on all summer through this like progression of rivers. And the first river in Chile, I'm at the Bio Bio, standing at the base camp, looking at the rapid, that I know that the next day I'm going to have to run in order to get back to base camp. And I'm like, this is the biggest rapid I've ever seen in my whole life. There's something to be said for a good roll, because I fell into every hole in that country that, because we went from the Bio, because at the time, speeded the Triple Crown. So you do the Bio, and then the Fui, and then the Fudalefu. And if there was a hole, I fell in it. And one day, I think it was at this rapid called Lost Yak, and Spee and Ken are up, and they're watching me come down and fall into another hole. And Spee looked, and Ken was like, Stud, does she do that on purpose? He was like, no, she can't read water. And so, at that time, there was a lot of transition in the gorge and with NOC, and people were starting to leave, and people were struggling with, NOC was struggling with their identity, like, should we keep growing, should we be small, and so Ken ended up having to make a decision about staying or leaving, and I was like, you're the best kayak instructor, you're an amazing teacher, and I happen to have worked as a meeting organizer, so we should just start our own company. And I'll be very honest that if I had, I hadn't been around that long, so I hadn't drunk the Kool-Aid, and if I had known then how hard it would be to set up and compete directly against a company with that kind of reputation and that big, I would have been scared. But it was kind of like running rapids, ignorance is bliss.
Right.
So,
you didn't know what you didn't know.
I did not. But I spent that whole year in the back of vans, first in Chile and then in Costa Rica, reading books about, like, how to start a business.
Okay.
How to do accounting. And then, we built the shop, Endless River, from scratch. And the one thing that Ken had said was, I don't want to do group instruction. I want to do private instruction. And I was like, great. But, at the time, nobody really did private instruction. And so people were intimidated. They go and take a class at NOC so they could take a day of kayak construction. And when they would tell me that, I would be like, oh, I could have paid another bill if they had just come here.
Right.
But so that's really how it started, and it was really pretty neat because we and then like at first we had no intention of doing rafting. We just wanted to do like coaching, like one-on-one instruction. And so we went to the Forest Service because it's a permitted river, and the Forest Service was like, great, get a permit, buy a company. And we're like, no, you don't understand. Coaching type instruction. And they're like, great, buy a company. And so we ended up buying this company called Mason's Raft Rentals. It was up in Topton, and Margaret Mason and her husband were getting a divorce, and he got the house, she got the rafting company. She was a local lady, and she never went rafting on the Nantahala River. But they owned Mason's Raft Rentals for a number of years. And so I was down at the falls one day watching, all those people come through the falls and like swimming and everything. And I went back and I'm like, you guys, we can't do self-guided trips. It's the craziest thing. I was just watching people fall out all over the place. And they were like, you have to do self-guided trips. But, because we were small and new and we weren't entrenched, like the first thing we had to do was buy equipment, and self-bailing rafts had just come out. Nobody in the Southeast was using self-bailing rafts, but we had to buy rafts. And, you look at rafting on the Nantahala, and where would people hurt themselves getting out and trying to, like, get the water out of their raft?
Yep.
And so we had these big banners that said, we use self-bailing rafts. And,
I remember that, yeah.
3 years, we were the only company. But what's so neat is that I think everybody would have eventually gone to self-bailing rafts, but we just kind of expedited it. And then, with kayak instruction, because we were doing private instruction, like at first it was an anomaly, but after a while, we didn't have a crystal ball to see that all of a sudden there'd be the internets and people would be overcommitted. And so people who once upon a time would take a week off and go and ride around in a van with these cool kayak instructors and eat meals, and like suddenly they didn't have a week to do that. And like our little spiel would be, you'll learn more with one day of private instruction than you could with a long weekend in a group of 12. And, how would we have known that people would be overcommitted? Time would become so valuable. And, in these days, almost everything is private instruction. And, but it's higher quality. And so people learned faster and learned better and learned how to roll better. And so, our own little way, we helped improve instruction. And, it kind of went on like that. Like, even before we finished the building, we went down and ran trips in Costa Rica. And, Costa Rica's a rainforest. And NOC at the time was running lots of people down in Costa Rica, but they were camping. And it's like, the operative word in rainforest is rain. And so we were like, we're going to do day trips and we're going to stay in nice hotels. And it didn't take that many years before we were taking all the people to Costa Rica, and there was no more camping down there. In fact, Doug Geiger was the first person to join us as a new instructor. And one day I was like, Doug, aren't you excited to go and guide in Costa Rica for the year? And he's like, or for the winter, and he was like, I'm not going to Costa Rica. I'm like, why not? Like, that's what we work all year for, is to go down there and paddle. And he was like, I went last year, trained. We were on the General. It flooded. People were getting leptospirosis. I don't want to go to Costa Rica. I'm like, oh, wait. You don't understand. We don't camp on our trips. We stay in hotels. And I'll never forget, we were at this hotel that we used that it was off season, so we got a really good rate, but it was a resort, and they had like hot tubs and stuff. And we were all sitting in the hot tubs, and I'm like, what do you think, Doug? And he was like, I wish I could send my friend Dan Dixon a picture right now, because this is how you be a guide. So, that started, and then And then, you know, one of the things that's hard is when you run your own company, it's really hard to work for somebody else. So, like, I went back down to Chile and just realized that it wasn't fair to Chris that I was there because, you know, I was kind of critical of stuff. And I was like, that's not fair to him because he works really hard. He runs a great trip. And so if I can't be happy with the way he runs trips, then I shouldn't be here. And Ken, of course, loves Chile. But we started hearing rumors about Ecuador. And this friend of ours, his dad was a VIP with Texaco who helped Ecuador build their petroleum industry. And so he had grown up there. And he was like, oh, they have rivers, but they're either really steep or they're flat. And so we sat around one day and talked about it. And Doug was like, I'll go and check it out if you want. We're like, well, it would have to be as quality of the rivers as Costa Rica, and as the accommodations have to be just as nice. So off Doug went, came back. He was like, the rivers are even better. He's like, you won't believe it. And the accommodations are okay. And he just kind of brushed that aside. And when we showed up, it turned out that he had found this place to stay that was these huts built out of bamboo with the thatched roofs. But the guy hadn't finished the thatched roofs yet, so he like had plastic over them. And I was like, Doug, this is not a resort. He's like, no, but there's potential here, don't you think? And so
in Ecuador, that's a resort.
It was, and so, and it was cool because Small World started there the year before us.
Okay.
And then we came and Dreamer, and we showed up the same year. In fact, Doug got out at a gas station and looked up, and there was Phil Dreamer standing there. And Phil was like, Doug, what are you doing here? And Doug was like, probably the same thing you are, Phil. And so, you know, even though there were the three of us there in that first year, that was like 95, 96.
Okay.
Nobody knew anything about the rivers, and you didn't know anything about the water levels. And so it was this huge learning experience. And like back then, it rained a lot, and the rivers would go up. You know, both in Ecuador and Costa Rica, you had these wild fluctuations in water level. And I would walk around to the locals and be like, is this normal? When it was raining really hard, and they would be like, it's La Luna. I'm like, La Luna. And I started tracking, and in Ecuador, when they had a growing moon, we would have these super irregular, heavy rain showers. And through the years, as I would track things, that's how it was. So, you know, that's kind of like the core of Endless. And, you know, being a small, like choosing to be small in this industry is challenging because numbers are how you make your money. And
Sure.
so to deliberately say we're going to be a small company, we're going to try and have a just do things at higher quality. You know, you're more doing it for the lifestyle and for being really proud of what you have rather than making a lot of money. But it's been an amazing journey, and there's not very much that I would change. But the thing that's the coolest is obviously, you know, the people that have come here. Like one day early on, Ken walked in and said, I know who our next instructor is going to be. I'm like, yeah, who's that? Well, he's this kid. His name's Craig Parks, and he's washing dishes down at NOC. I'm like, sounds like our kind of guy. And the thing that's neat is because we were small, I think it was easier for us to give people opportunities. You know, like Craig, he was lost in a crowd, but, you know, if he hadn't been discovered, we would have not had one of the most amazing kayaker / kayak instructors that has ever been. I mean, Craig was incredible. And so, you know, it's been fun to be that small company where people could really stand out and develop themselves, but feel like they have ownership and that they're part of what's happening. And like, the other thing that I really love about Endless is that even though we had these like manly men, like Ken is like a definitive male, Doug was definitive male. When I hear people struggle with, especially women struggle with like the male-female relationships in our industry, I'll stop and think, and I'm like, I am so lucky because that never happened here.
Sure.
And if I had to say like one thing that really stands out that sets Endless apart from anybody else, I think that's it. That it's like there was a bar set, and it didn't matter whether you were male or female. And if you didn't hit that bar, it didn't matter if you were male or female. You still got a lot of shit from Ken and Doug and things like that. And so everybody was like held to the same standard, and nobody had excuses. And like now we have this really amazing, powerful group of women that are here. And it's at a time when there are fewer and fewer women into the outdoor industry, unfortunately, and definitely into kayaking. And so it makes me really proud that we have these women that they stand up for themselves on the river, they stand up for each other at work and for themselves, and they have their own voice, and that's pretty cool. So there's that, and then I think the other thing is how much time and energy we put into kids.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times people really don't want to deal as much with kids, but they're like our future. And
For sure.
And, you know, organized sports is still at such a high, like participation in organized sports is still as big as it ever was. But individual sports, just being outside is disappearing. You know, there's that book, as a teacher, you probably read that book, The Last Child in the Woods, about how kids aren't climbing trees and building forts and things like that. So they're losing their imagination, their ability to make decisions and to understand risk and things like that, and to fall out of a tree and break an arm and go, okay, that limb was a little too small, won't do that. And you know, that's what these, especially outdoor sports, really help kids develop. And it doesn't discriminate. Like we just finished we run this little Nantahala Kids Club, and at least 50% of these kids from age 6 to probably 14 are girls from the local community. And so
That's great.
Yeah, so it's really fun. That was not a short answer.
That wasn't a short answer. No, that was the first question of the episode. But what an incredible journey you took us on there. I mean, basically, you answered about 5 questions I would have had. So that was perfect. Yeah, that was really good.
I covered 33 years. 35, 36, never mind, a few years.
Fantastic. I mean, obviously, you know, Kent, you mentioned your husband, and then, you know, Crispilius, Doug Geiger, you know, people like that. But who were some of the other, you know, did you have any female mentors that, you know, kind of showed you or taught you or guided you, or just friends that you kind of pushed each other with through those years?
Yes and no. More no than yes. Because like my, probably 2 of the people that I considered my closest, you know, like people I connected with the most were Maria and Whitney. But they spent a lot of time in Asia, and they were on the freestyle thing. And, you know, I would spend all summer teaching and running Endless. And, you know, when you run your own business, you work a lot. And then as soon as it was over, when most people have downtime, you know, we'd head to first Costa Rica, and then right after that, Ecuador. And so I missed out on a lot of the community here, and didn't develop that as much. But I developed such strong relationships with, you know, the guys that I worked with that, you know, that was really awesome. And when the opportunity was there, like, it was really cool because, like, Maria and I would, like, we'd get on the Cascades, or we'd sneak away for a day and go over and paddle on the Ocoee together. But she was running her own business, I was running my own business, and so not as much. I wish I could give you a list of these really awesome women, because they were around, like Bunny Johns. I would say probably one of the people that to this day I looked up to the most. She was so amazing. And I remember one day I was talking to her, and I was like, Bunny, like when you first started out, like what do you remember about like the relationships between the men and the women here in the gorge and everything? And like, did you really feel like kind of the men railroaded you or anything? And and she's a little demure woman with this most
Right.
powerful character, and she just looked at me like, "What are you talking about?" Because right before me were like the bunnies and this whole group of amazing badass women that like guided on the Chattooga and stuff. So
Yeah.
I didn't know them, but I knew
Okay.
of them,
Sure.
and so that was really cool.
Did you ever, pursue, like, how much did you pursue your own paddling to, like, push yourself, whether it was like, extreme paddling, or if you ever dabbled in any kind of competition? I mean, I know it sounds like you were pretty singularly focused. I mean, obviously, very accomplished kayaker. But, did you ever, how did you balance that, like trying to pursue your own paddling for your own personal growth, or, just fun with running the business?
I'll be real honest. When you run a business, a lot of times if there's not a lot of room for fun. Um, but because of the Costa Rica and what Chile, Costa Rica, Ecuador, like there were times where I was hanging on by the seat of my pants. We paddled hard stuff, and
Yeah.
like at first in Chile and Costa Rica, um, I needed a job, and so I video boated, and so I would have to be the first to go down these rivers. And we were paddling, back then, like, um, there were a lot of like solid class 4+ boaters. And so
Sure.
our trips, a lot of them were solid class 4+ trips.
Right.
And like the first year in Costa Rica, Ken would be like, you need to go down to the bottom of that rapid and set up for a video. Maybe I'd run the rapid once, and I would be paddling.
Let's eddy out and take a quick break. Do you need a break from the cold of a North American winter? Then let's head south to the best whitewater on earth at Pucon Kayak Retreat. Email me at bflowkayak@gmail.com to learn more about how you can take the ultimate paddling adventure in the heart of Chile. Now let's peel out and head downstream.
Paddling down like the middle Reventazón, or paddling down in Chile by myself, going, you're not supposed to paddle alone. And I would like throw my paddle on shore and throw my boat and get the video camera out, because I was carrying like a video camera between my legs, and like the whole time, be like this, because I know the minute he would say you need to go and video this next rapid, I know it would be a hard one. And but what complicated things even more was this is when videos were done like VHS to VHS.
Right.
So not only was I running a company, and because it was really important for me to be on the river, I would teach during the day and then do all the business stuff at night.
Wow.
So I would do like the accounting or whatever it was. But then in those first years, I also would go home and I might have 6 or 7 videos to do from Chile and just as many from Costa Rica. And there would be times where I would be finishing the last one like in September, when it was time to just turn around and go again. And so after a couple years of that, I said, you guys, I'm not video boating anymore. And I'm tired of running the rapids all by myself. And so, it wasn't. And, if I was doing the same kind of business, but it was in Atlanta, in an office, I would have a lot of room to be able to complain that, working, 12 to 18 hours a day, year round, not getting a lot of time of your own. But how could I complain? Because part of it was choice. Like I chose to develop as a kayak instructor, and I chose to learn how to be an international guide. And so I chose to do the business side of things at night, and it probably kept me sane.
Sure.
And, So it was good. So no complaints.
Right. Um, I want you to think about the progression of the sport through an instructor's lens and with the boat designs. I mean, because you've seen it from the long pointy boats like the Mirage you mentioned in the Dancer era through boats getting really, really short through like when everybody was, it seemed like people were even creaking in play boats in like the late 90s, early 2000s. Then you get like an opposite through the teens. You get this like creek boat revolution. Everybody's going down the Nantahala in creek boats and full face helmets. Then you get the half slice revolution. And now we're seeing like these huge, big bow rocker boats. So, how did instruction change with the times and with the designs of the boats?
Well, I really did have kind of a front seat because one of the other cool things that happened is at the same time that Endless River Adventures started, this was 1993, so did a guy by the name of Chan, who started this company out in Colorado called Wavesport. And in fact, what's interesting is that Mirage, at a certain point before I moved down here, I sold it and bought this boat called a Wavesport Laser because it was small. But what I didn't know was it was one of Chan's first boats, and Chan was a slalom boater, so he believed that a high seat was really good for your forward stroke. And he was
Okay.
out in Colorado, and this is Colorado before people were creek boating in Colorado. And
Right.
so out west, being upside down wasn't a big deal. But now, bring that boat to the southeast, where you're upside down a lot because your center of gravity's high. And like my second time in my Wavesport Laser down the Ocoee, I swam 5 times. And, it was also because I was with some guys that didn't really give me a lot of beta on what was downstream. But Ken kept saying, like, Juliet, get rid of that boat. It's terrible. And he was still dealing with Vladimir Vonhoff. And so he finally one day like took that boat away from me and put me in a jetty. And I paddled down the river. I'm like, oh my God, it's really stable. How about that? And then one day Chan showed up at our shop because he was trying to get his boats sold east of the Mississippi, but nobody would talk to him. And by the time it was done, we knew 3 things. Number one, he was crazy. And he really didn't need caffeine or any more drugs. And his boats wouldn't sell in the Southeast, but he had potential. And he had drive and curiosity. He's like, tell me what I need in order to sell boats east of the Mississippi. And we were like, first thing you have to do is drop your seat. Stability sells here. And people like being stable in boats. And he made this special drop seat for the Frankenstein. And we were like, you're on the right path. And it's funny because nobody would give him the time of day. And then the next boat he came out with was the Kinetic and the Godzilla. And, nobody was really addressing, like, if you think about it, back then a boat, if you looked at the specs, it would say good for somebody between 110 and 250. And that was almost every boat. Chan had these really cool girls because he was building his team. And they were like, dude, make us boats. And so, Kinetic and the Godzilla, and everybody at the time was paddling like Corsicas. And they got in those 2 boats and they're like, this is cool. And, it just went from there, and it was really interesting because then, like a year later, NOC kind of made a mistake. They called up Chan and they said, we still don't really want to sell your boats, but if you'll pull them out of Endless, we'll let you sell them in our store. And he was kind of like, fuck you guys, these guys are kind of nice. And then the X came out, and that changed everything. And, I remember at the time Craig was really devoted to Shane and Shane's boat designs, and Shane was still at Perception. And so one day I was at the falls, and Craig came down like wave wheeling in this new boat called the X. And I'm like, wow, things are about to get interesting. And the Easy came out, And that was really crazy. And that was when all of a sudden, everything was a boat, regardless, Dagger, Perception, everybody had boats like the Easy and the Big Easy. Those are the only boats we were teaching kayaking in. Like now, it's super crazy. And then the Ace and you're right. Then everything started getting really short. And thank God, like Wave Sport was the first to hear people say, I'm old and I'm cranky and I don't want to do cartwheels. I just want to run the river. And boom, out came the diesel. And then came the Burn and then, the Remix, and it just went from there. And, it kind of goes back to something that Ken had picked up on when he hooked up with Vladimir, because Vladimir at the time had the Jetty, and that's when everybody was in the Dancer. And the Dancer, your legs were out and really dropped down and close, so it was super unstable. And here came the Jetty, where your legs were splayed, it was easy to roll, and you could teach people easier. And it's kind of the same thing, like those years where we were teaching people out of like Aces and Sirens and Easies and boats like that with every company, and then suddenly to go to the diesel, it's like people were right side up again, and and it made things a lot easier. And do
you think though that maybe slowed the progression down because people weren't flipping and people were just like bombing down in these big tanks and spinning all day without getting their hair wet?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
And it's one of the things, like, because I've been teaching for so long, I will get really good boaters who like come to me and they make sure nobody's looking and they're like, Juliet, I lost my roll. Like really good boaters. And I'll be like, oh, welcome to the club. And they'll look really surprised. I'm like, good boaters lose their roll. And they're like, they do? I'm like, absolutely. Why? Because you never tip over. And and when you do, you're in your comfort zone. And what do we say as kayakers? Oh, I had a dry hair day. And yeah, especially in these boats now, like, wakas and stuff where you don't even get your hair wet. And it's funny, this one guy one time was like, I think there needs to be like a support group for good boaters who have lost their roll so that they can talk about it, because it's hard to talk about. I'm like, go and get a house class and learn how to do stroke sports. It'll be the best thing, and you're like tipping over and you're on an eddy line and you're laughing about it and you're upside down. And so, yes, it definitely, in these different phases that people have gone through, I think there's been times where people definitely were probably better boaters, but the big change you have in our industry is people have less time. And so where people used to be super committed to kayaking, and they'd get really good, they'd become, class 5 boaters. Now people want to get to the point where they can have fun on the Ocoee, and that's as good as they want to be. And
they're fine with that, yeah.
And they're fine, and it's social. Like, their social world, which in one way is very cool. It sure beats like happy hour, or whatever people would do if they didn't have kayaking. And so if you have, but these same people also want a mountain bike, or they have kids, or they have a partner that doesn't kayak.
Right.
And so maybe they get out 2 or 3 times a month, and if they weren't any good, then they wouldn't keep kayaking. And so I think that, in the Southeast, having dam-controlled rivers, having warm rivers, having a long season, and having these boats that somebody who's not very good can down the Nana Hill and the Ocoee okay, and not be a complete train wreck. And it's not the worst thing.
Sure.
And I remember I heard Corin one time just giving shit to southeastern boaters and them paddling like creek boats on the Ocoee and all that. And I'm like, you know what? Who cares? You know what they're paddling now on the Ocoee? Spuds and taters. Like, you will be shocked at how many people are in this newest, the spud and the tater. And how cool that you get somebody who, like, they enjoy the Nantahala, but they're not really good enough for the Ocoee, but their friends all graduate. And they can either get left behind, or they can go and paddle and be scared to death the whole day. Or they can hop in a spud and a tater and go over with their friends and still have fun, hang out, camp that night, and still have fun. And so, I think a positive thing in our industry has been it's now accepted that you don't have to just be like the stud kayaker.
Yes.
You can be in a Puma or a Tater or a big Waka OG or a half slice, and you can all go out and have fun together. And I think
I've
that's
found as somebody coming back to the sport after a 20-year layoff, it's a lot more inclusive now, a lot more forgiving community. I mean, it's always was a great community, don't get me wrong, but I feel like, especially because of how fast the sport was growing in the late 90s through the mid 2000s, and there was actually money in the sport, like there was a lot more ego and a lot more competition. And if you weren't running the hardest rapids or you weren't doing the hottest playboat move, then you were getting left behind. And now it's a big tent. It's like, just go out on the river and have fun, and whatever gets you outdoors, that's, class fun. That's the ticket now, it seems like.
Yeah, I agree.
And I don't know if that's just my perspective or not, but this is kind of what I feel. And like I said, it was always an amazing community, and anytime you're around river people, but it seems it's been magnified even more so now.
Yeah, and I think in the southeast we're really lucky because we have dam controlled rivers, long season, and so we've got young boaters in, we have old boaters. I mean, like, we have a guy that his name's Brad. And he came to me, I can't even remember how long ago now, and he had been out of kayaking for years. And he was in his late 60s, and he wanted a tune-up on the Nantahala. And then he called and wanted me to take him on the Ocoee, and then he wanted to be taken down the upper Ocoee. Well, here he is. He's probably mid to late 70s, and now he's paddling the Chioa. And,
nice.
And then you have kids. And you have tons of women. I mean, there was a women's takeover of the Ocoee yesterday. I wasn't there because I had to work, but I bet there were, guarantee you, over 100 people. And
wow.
When Laura and those got women, and when Laura Farrell ran the women's takeover of the Green, the last year there were 110 women that ran the upper Green and 38 women that ran the Narrows.
Wow.
And so, and then you'll have a day where the Cascades and the Upper Nantahala releases, and you'll go up there and there'll be like 300 people up there. And so the sport is still doing okay. Maybe not great, and maybe in the big picture it's being challenged because of a lot of things, outside things that have nothing to do with kayaking. It's like weather, time, too much weight, risk inherent and all that people aren't doing sports like kayaking as much, but a lot of people here are. And so you go out on the river and you look at a group, and there'll be like a 15-year-old paddling with a couple of 50-year-olds and a couple of 30-year-olds, and some are in creek boats, some are in half slices, and they're all having fun together. And it's a friend of mine got into kayaking, and she looked around, she's like, this place is Mars. And I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, kids talking to adults? Juliet, that doesn't happen. And I'm like, what do you mean? It happens in kayaking all the time. She's like, no, in the real world it doesn't happen. But, our sport allows people to find something in common with each other, whether you're young or old, or a plumber, or an attorney, and you put all your kayaking gear on, and you're a kayaker, and you just go out and have goofy fun.
That's it. Juliet, I want to ask for some flow advice now, and I want you to think about two groups of people. One would, and what better person to give advice to people wanting to learn how to kayak? Like I said, you've got to be, in the top 5 most, the person's taught the most people how to kayak. So a young or just anybody beginning, no matter what their age, and then you mentioned so many people. I'm sure you're seeing a lot of people who are maybe trying to come back to the sport as they're older now and left the sport for whatever reasons. So think about those two people. What advice would you give them for starting in kayaking or coming back to kayaking?
I think the first piece of advice, and obviously I'm biased, but I don't understand why kayakers don't embrace professional instruction. Like I tell people,
1,000%.
Olympic bound athletes have coaches. So why not have a coach? It, you know, like, you know how sometimes when people are getting into the sport and they're like, what kind of boat should I get? And some people are like, get a boat, like a river runner. And then some people are like, no, no, no. Get a boat where you'll be upside down a lot because you'll become a faster boat, a better boater faster. And I'm like, no, becoming a good boater is about building confidence. And in this day and time, like if it takes you a year to learn how to roll, you're probably not going to stick with kayaking, especially if you have to drive a long way. Where if you get a professional instructor, not your friend, not your buddy, but somebody who like every day goes to work and thinks, what can I do to be a better teacher and get people to learn faster? I don't get it. It's the quirkiness of our sport. It's the same thing as kayakers are always like, I've never bought a new boat in my entire career. And then they're like, hey, all the kayak shops are closing down. I wonder why. And
Right.
so that's a big thing and then also for people getting back into it is to ask yourself why you're getting back into kayaking, and hopefully your answer is because you love kayaking, and so that you kind of check your ego and remember, yeah, it's true, like 20 years ago you were a badass and could jump into hellhole and like throw 30 cartwheels, and now you're like putting in on the Akoi and your heart's pitter-patting a little bit. Like, that's okay. It's like, that's all right. And maybe you won't like paddle section 4 at 4 feet like you did once upon a time, but you're getting back into kayaking because of the community and being on the river and leaving your electronics behind and like having that. Kayaking's so much like meditation. You get off a river and you realize you haven't thought about anything else, especially if you're kind of scared. And so it clears the clutter and slows your brain down, and it's so healthy for you. And so
I love that.
to remember that.
I love that you said that about like, paddling the Akoi again or something where you get your heart going again, where when you're younger, you didn't even think about it. And I know coming back to the sport a year ago, like even running like Nantahala Falls, like I wasn't nervous, but I was like, I need to adjust myself in my seat a little bit here and just, like make sure I
Tighten your
punch bottom
helmet a
hole
little
pretty
bit.
good. Like I don't want to
Yeah.
flip here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I embrace that. I mean, that would be my like kind of dovetailing what you said. Embrace that kind of adrenaline that you got again, because that was what you felt when you're first starting, and kind of being a beginner again as an older, more experienced person is a lot of fun.
And it's okay to screw up. It's like, I remember, like, I don't screw up very often, but and part of it's because, I've been doing this for a long time, so I don't get out of my box that much. My bad. But years ago, when we started running raft trips on the Upper Akoi, so we always use a kayak guide on our trips, whether it's one boat or 12 boats. We use a kayak guide. And so I decided I needed to go over and scout out the kayak lines. And Ken was like, be careful at Humongous. Like, don't cut that river right eddy too tight, or you will just whip around and be right in that hole. And so here I am paddling down the river, kind of figuring out what I would call where the kayak guide needed to be. And I whip into that eddy over on River Right, and the next thing you know, I am in that damn hole, and there's probably 800 people standing there like watching me. And finally I come burbling out, and like my glasses are askew and I have snot coming out of my nose. But I was like, oh, that was good. And partly it was because I didn't swim out. But
Right.
it's like, kayaking helps you be okay with making mistakes sometimes.
Sure.
And kind of getting excited about it a little bit and being like, shoot, like I was surfing in that hole and I got out. Phew, good thing, because my buddies were all betting on whether I was going to swim or not.
And you would have never heard the end of it.
Exactly.
Well, Juliet, now I want the Pucon Kayak Retreat Pro Flow hot tip. If somebody was interested in to like start some sort of, uh, you know, paddle sport company, maybe kayak instruction or raft guiding or something. We've talked to people about, we talked to Joe Pulliam about starting, something more like boat manufacturing. But if somebody wanted to start a paddle sport company, what would be your advice other than not to do it?
It's funny. Mark Singleton's wife, her name's Debbie, and she used to teach outdoor leadership at Western. And
Yeah.
she would have me come and speak at her class once a year.
Cool.
And after a few years in a row, she called me. She's like, I want you to speak the class, but I think we should change the subject. And I'm like, I'm depressing people, aren't I? She's like, yeah. And I'll be honest, it's really hard. And it's not just because rivers are permitted, but insurance, it's, the people are scared that it's going to rain, and your overhead costs are pretty intimidating, and so it's hard to think of starting a new company. It's just 30 years ago that was an option. These days you would be better to go in and buy an existing company and then try and mold it to what you'd like to do rather than trying to start from scratch. And have a lot of cash going in, because if you went to a bank and said you wanted to borrow X amount of money to buy this river company, a banker would probably laugh at you. So that wasn't very positive. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but I will say it's very, very challenging in this day and time.
Well, I think it's a little bit like, and I've talked to other guests about this, like the Malcolm Gladwell outliers thing about certain groups of people who exceed and succeed. They come from certain generations. And, if you look at like, you and your husband and Chris Spilius and, and then on like the boat manufacturer design side of things, the EJs, the Shanes, the Corns, they all were right there in that little sweet spot. Of age and kind of hit it at the right time. So I agree with what you're saying. Like it would be really difficult to do that in today's world, I think.
Yeah. And it's a shame, because new people coming in, it's like when we came in, the change that we brought, it keeps an industry healthy. And, it's the same thing with boat manufacturing. Like, who would start their own kayak manufacturing company in this day and time? But those new people with those new ideas are what keep things new and changing. Yeah,
it fuels innovation for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and competition's healthy. I mean, I think NOC got better. Like this is not like because I was teaching there. It's just like the group of instructors during my time at NOC. Like I think that we all got better because the instructors at ERA were so good.
And we all learned from each other.
We learned from each other. We pushed each other and challenged each other in a healthy way, and it kept the industry and the sport and teaching progressions moving. I thought.
I totally agree.
Yeah. Well, are you ready to run some rapids with me?
Sure.
All right. So I'm going to throw out a topic of kayaking, and you got to give me your Mount Rushmore.
Okay.
All right. Boat designs of all time. These are your favorites or the most innovative, however you want to judge it.
I would say the ones that were the most interesting, and I'm coming from my perspective. And so like, I think the Jetty was an amazing boat. The X was a game changer. It really made everybody step back and go, we're really changing the ball here. And now I love half slices. Like, I really think it's fun that like I paddle a hot whip, and I think it's great. Like not as much boat. Well, part of boat design, we all have to give such a huge thanks to Bob McDonough, because he was the one that one day went, you know what, boats don't have to be uncomfortable, do they? And, he created really good outfitting. And thank God, because, like, if you think that it used to be that you'd have to, like, it would take you hours to file some foam and glue and tear out and refoam, and now you just, like, click your back band and move your bulkhead and boom, you're ready to go. And so it's not just even just the boat design, but like figuring out how to make the boats, safer, like increasing the cockpit and more comfortable. And I think all of that just has been really positive for boat design.
Absolutely. Kayakers of all time. Give me your personal list, not like somebody you've seen on YouTube. Give me Juliet's Mount Rushmore.
Oh, my Mount Rushmore of kayakers. I have to start with Ken because, not because of my relationship with him, but when I moved to the gorge, I thought teachers were heroes, and the first time I went out with him, I'm like, oh my God, he's like this amazing teacher, and obviously I learned a lot from him guiding too. His saying was always, if I make people more scared of me than the river, then they'll do well. Every once in a while I would try that, and I always failed. Like, I could never make people super scared of me. But Craig, like, I think I have this incredible affinity for people who are modest.
Yeah.
And like Craig is one of the most incredible kayakers there is, but he's also the most dedicated teacher. One of the volunteers that was helping me today was telling me that he went out with us about 2 weeks ago so that we could pick his brain about stuff. And she had a question about stern squirts, and she was in town and Craig drove by, and he turned around and came back. This is just like the other day. And was like, Andrew, I was thinking about your question about stern squirts. Like, that was really cool. And, Chris, of course, was such an amazing showboater.
Yeah.
You have to give Eric, EJ, his due. He's amazing. He's personable, he's kind, and he's the most incredible salesperson there ever was.
Yes.
And he's a stud athlete. Even today, like, he sets a high bar for all of us when you don't want to like go out and exercise and want to say like, well, maybe I'm just not as buff as I used to be. And then you see him in a Speedo and you're like, dang, like, I don't have an excuse.
That's right.
And I was really fortunate. I got to spend a winter with Lars Holbeck.
Wow.
And that was really cool. And so I've been so fortunate to just get to paddle with so many amazing leaders in our industry, and people who were willing to give so much, but push themselves as well. So I could probably spend all night making up a list.
Countries of all time to paddle in.
Hands down, I think it's Ecuador.
Okay.
And I love the variety of rivers that you can go from a creek one day to a big river. I love the fact that you go through, you spend time on a river like the Quijos and nobody else is there. And I love, spending all summer on dam-controlled rivers and having paddled the same dam-controlled rivers for over 30 years, like to wake up in the morning and realize that it rained all night and the water's high, it makes it exciting and interesting.
Sure.
And then the culture is, there's just something to be said for using your kayak as a mechanism to travel and to meet people and not be like your typical tourist. And so I would say, of all the really beautiful places I've been fortunate to have paddled in, Ecuador still is the one that just has my heart.
Awesome. Well, this next rapid we're going to run blind, and so this is a blind ranking. We're going to do rivers of the Southeast. So I'm going to name a river, and you got to put it in a slot of either 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and you don't know what's coming next. So we're going to run this rapid blind.
Okay.
All right, you ready?
Okay.
The Ocoee.
I would say, what's my top number?
Like 1 would be the best, like your number 1, and then 5th would be the 5th best.
I would say 2.
Okay. The Chioa.
Would be 4.
Okay. The Chattooga.
1.
Okay, so you got 3 and 5 left. Let's go the Tallulah.
That would be at 5.
Okay, and the Nantahala.
I would say the Nantahala is right up there. So 3. 3.
Okay, so yeah. Chattooga, Ocoee, Nantahala, Chioa, Tallulah.
Yeah.
I think if you knew the rivers ahead of time, that would probably be the correct order, right?
Yep, I think so. And Tallulah, sad, poor little Tallulah ends up 5 just because of those damn stairs, and the next day I can't walk. And so that and Oceana, it's like, to have one of the easiest class 4 rapids in the world that has some of the worst consequences, and walking it would be worse than running it. So that's, sorry, Tallulah, but
okay, no problem. Well, this is now final flow. And I want you to think about, this is your last, if you knew that it was going to be your last day on the water. But the river goddesses came down and they said, Juliet, you've had a good run, but this is your last time putting on a spray skirt. That's the bad news. But the good news is you get to pick your run, you get to pick your crew, and you get to pick your boat. What would it be?
Dear. Okay, so a friend of mine told me that if you never ask, the answer is always no. So I'm going to say, can I have 2 or 3 last days? Because 1 would definitely be being with my boys, with Ken, Craig, Doug, Steve, Brian, Matt, Ryan, and then Ben and Mike and Tarquino and Felipe and Daniel, and being on a river with them. Like, we would always do a scouting week where we would just blast down rivers, and being either on the Pequari or the Reventosong, the lower Reventosong for sure. And boat, I have to say, I'm a weird kayaker. I'm not super picky about boats. So
okay.
As long as it wasn't like a Response or Crossfire, I'd be okay.
Awesome. Well, that sounds like a good final flow to me.
Oh, but wait.
Oh, you got more. Okay.
Yeah,
this is your episode, so I'm gonna let you riff here.
So I need a day on the Chattooga. I was so lucky. We all live these busy lives, but one day, Laura Farrell, Ann Sodenheimer, Maria Noakes, and I got to paddle Section 4 of the Chattooga, and it was one of the coolest days.
Cool.
But I would need to add Whitney to that also. And so those would be 2 of the days.
Okay. Awesome. Is there a third?
Well, it's like a cat with 9 lives. I'll stop at 2 or I won't be able to stop.
Awesome. Well, Juliet, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for everything that you've meant to the sport, continue to do. Thank you for the friendship through the years. Never had the privilege of working for you, but certainly admired everything that you do at ERA and everything that you guys have built there. It's just tremendous, and congratulations on so many wonderful years of success there, and many more coming forward, I'm sure.
Well, and I look forward to seeing you on the river this summer, so we'll have some fun.
I'm going to be down there. Yeah, I can't wait. It sounds great.
All right. Thanks, Brad.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of B-Flow Sessions, where we explore how paddlers find their flow on the water and in life. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow the show, leave a rating, or share it with a friend. It truly helps us grow the community. And a huge thank you to Pucon Kayak Retreat for sponsoring today's episode. If you're ready for a world-class Chilean whitewater adventure, email me at bflowkayak@gmail.com and I'll help you get dialed in. Until next time, keep finding your flow.